The United Nations Security Council is tasked with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security. However, its effectiveness is frequently scrutinized, particularly in the context of the veto power granted to its five permanent members: China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. This unique privilege allows any one of these nations to unilaterally block substantive resolutions, even in cases of urgent global crises. Critics argue that this mechanism risks rendering the UNSC ineffective and even irrelevant when it fails to address conflicts or major abuses. On the other hand, proponents suggest that the veto ensures stability by preventing unilateral dominance and maintaining the consent of the most powerful nations. This essay examines whether the veto at the UNSC undermines its relevance by exploring its impacts on conflict resolution and the body's legitimacy. One major criticism of the veto power is that it often obstructs timely and decisive action in the face of global conflicts and humanitarian crises. Numerous cases illustrate how permanent members wield their vetoes to protect their strategic allies or national interests, regardless of broader international consequences. For instance, Russia has consistently vetoed resolutions addressing the Syrian civil war, shielding the Assad regime from accountability for alleged war crimes. Similarly, the United States has frequently used its veto to block resolutions critical of Israel, reflecting domestic political considerations rather than global consensus. Such instances demonstrate how the veto power enables geopolitical rivalries to paralyze the Council's ability to act collectively. Moreover, the structural rigidity of the veto system exacerbates the issue. According to Zivkok in 2015, the veto fosters a deadlock dynamic where permanent members prioritize their national interests over international peace, leading to a pattern of inaction. This inaction erodes the UNSC's credibility and effectiveness, particularly in the eyes of smaller states and global civil society. The inability to address conflicts like those in Syria, Yemen, and Myanmar has led to growing calls for reform, as the veto often prevents even symbolic resolutions that could exert diplomatic pressure. The veto's impact on conflict resolution is compounded by the perception that it creates a two-tiered system of accountability. Permanent members can use their veto to evade scrutiny or intervention in conflicts where they are directly involved. For example, China vetoes have stymied efforts to address human rights abuses in Xinjiang and Myanmar, while Russia has wielded its veto to block condemnation of its actions in Ukraine. Such selective enforcement undermines the UNSC's legitimacy, reinforcing the view that it is more of a tool for the powerful than a genuinely impartial arbiter of peace. In addition to its impact on conflict resolution, the veto system undermines the UNSC's legitimacy as a representative and fair institution. The composition of the permanent members reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945, not contemporary global order. As Luck in 2006 argues, the concentration of veto power in the hands of five states, all nuclear armed and predominantly Western or aligned with Western interests, is increasingly at odds with the aspirations of emerging powers and the global South. The overrepresentation of certain regions and underrepresentation of others further alienates key stakeholders. Africa, for instance, is often the focus of UNSC resolutions but lacks any permanent member with veto power, despite its growing influence and population. This imbalance fosters resentment and diminishes the perceived legitimacy of the Council's decisions, Proposals for reform, such as expanding the permanent membership to include countries like India, Brazil, or South Africa, have gained traction but face opposition from the current permanent members who are reluctant to dilute their influence. Furthermore, the veto's perceived abuse exasperates cynicism about the UNSC's impartiality. Thomas Weiss in 2020 highlights how vetoes cast during crises involving mass atrocities such as in Rwanda and Darfur have tarnished the Council's moral authority. This undermines not only the UNSC but also the broader UN system, as its perceived inability to act decisively on urgent matters erodes public trust and support for multilateralism. Civil society actors and non governmental organizations increasingly bypass the UNSC, turning to alternative forums or unilateral action, which further marginalize its role in global governance. In conclusion, the veto power at the UN Security Council poses a significant challenge to its relevance in addressing modern conflicts and major abuses. By enabling geopolitical rivalries to dominate proceedings, the veto undermines the Council's effectiveness in conflict resolution and creates a perception of selective enforcement. Furthermore, the concentration of veto power among a handful of states diminishes the Council's legitimacy, as it fails to reflect the realities of the contemporary international system. While proponents argue that the veto ensures stability by requiring consensus among major powers, it's repeated to block action in crises such as Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar suggests that it often serves as a tool of paralysis rather than cooperation. Without meaningful changes, the veto risks transforming the UNSC from a guarantor of global order to a symbol of dysfunction.